Okay, today I want to talk to you about growing carrots. I love to grow carrots. They're, particularly when they're grown organically, they're just a wonderfully nutritious vegetable. But in a lot of the questions I get when I'm out doing workshops, and that is how to grow them properly. So I want to show you a foolproof way of getting there. A few essentials that you need to know before growing carrots is that they need to be grown in full sun. I'm going to put him in this bed today. It gets probably 6 hours, even though it gets a bit of morning shade. It gets about 6 hours of sunlight, so it's going to be fine. You need to grow them in a reasonably loose, well-drained soil. So we've got raised beds here. They're not all that raised, but they're slightly raised. And after years of soil improvement, the soil is nice and friable. It was clay, but we've improved that. Carrots is that they hate fertiliser. So this bed has had a really hungry crop. It had lettuce and rocket and coriander in it. I've removed those, and I'm not going to fertilise, because any kind of fertiliser is going to make you get lovely green tops but no root system. So you need to make sure you don't have any fertiliser. They must be grown by seed. If you buy punnets, you're going to be disturbing the root system. A carrot is basically a swollen taproot, and if that taproot is damaged in any way when you're transplanting it, it won't develop properly and won't grow anymore. So you've got to make sure that you don't disturb that taproot, and the only way that can happen is by growing them by seed. They must be planted at the right time of the year. Your soil needs to be between 15 and 20 degrees. Now that doesn't happen even in a warm temperate climate. It won't happen until about the end of September. In a cool climate, you're looking probably to the end of October. So you've got to make sure that you allow the soil to warm up before you start trying to plant your seed. You also need to make sure you don't plant them too deeply, because they're very fine seed, and if they're too deep down, they won't get enough light and won't germinate, or they can take too long to get through the soil and rot in the meantime. So they need to be planted really shallow and very little fine over the top, and then you need to make sure that they're kept moist. They need to be kept moist through the whole germination process, which can be up to 12 days, and that can be really difficult. Carrots don't want weed competition. They come through as a very, very fine seed, and any kind of weed competition is going to overshadow those seedlings, and they're not going to germinate properly. So you need a weed-free environment, which is really difficult if you've grown any kind of vegetable. You'll know that how weeds grow, and they always germinate quicker than anything else. And because of the long germination time for carrots, they can take over that carrot patch really easily. Carrots need to be thinned. Now I'm going to show you how I sow them quite sparsely, but they'll still need to be, make sure you haven't got, you've got at least 3 to 5 centimetres between. And then when I start to harvest, I will harvest every second one to allow the others room to grow. And the last thing they need is consistent moisture. When you've got a well-drained soil, you need to make sure you water them fairly regularly. So that's the 10 things that you need for carrots to grow well. Now I'm going to show you how I use my foolproof method to do it. What I've got here is a fork, I've got a rake, I've got obviously some carrot seed, I've got some sugarcane mulch which I use for weed control, I've got some seed raising mix and some hessian, and then some wire protection. So the first thing I do, I've cleaned up this bed, removed any weeds, obviously any plant parts from the last crop, and then I'm just going to fork over the soil nice and deeply without turning it, just to loosen it, because it needs to be nice and friable so that those plant roots can get down nice and deep. As you can see, this is really already quite friable, and that deep forking will just make sure that it's friable all the way down and nice and loose. Okay, once I've forked that all over, I then spread sugarcane mulch all over the top of this area. The sugarcane mulch is basically for weed control, and if you do this and get your carrots up, you really don't have to do any kind of maintenance to them. They don't need fertilising, they just need to be kept moist and weed free, and this will keep everything weed free. Okay, once I've spread it all out, now it needs to be, for good germination or for good weed suppression, you need about 3 to 4 centimetres all over. I then decide where my rows are going to be. Now I like to look at a brick width, and I just make a small trench with my rake all the way down. So once I've got those furrows so you can imagine all this is going to be covered by sugarcane mulch, which will suppress any weed germinating. And then I'm putting a sterile seed raising mix into the trenches that will prevent any seeds coming up where the carrots are coming up. And once I've done that, I just lightly tramp it, sort of spread it out nice and evenly, tramp it down, just with your number 9s, nice and even. Your seed raising mix is going to be it's going to be sterile. It's going to maintain moisture a lot easier than a normal soil because it's got wetting agents in it, and it's nice and friable for seed germination if your soil preparation's not exact. Carrot seed. Great value for money. For $3 you can get a packet of seed with 500 seeds in it, which, you get possibly 10 carrots to kilo, so you're looking at 50 kilos of carrot in one packet, which is a lot of seed. As you can see, carrot seed is really fine. It's really hard to try and sow it, because carrots need to be, 3 to 5 centimetres apart. It's hard to do that. But what I tend to do is roll it between my thumb and my forefinger and try and just push out a seed 1 or 2 at a time as I'm moving along. So they don't need to be in a straight line. You sort of move backwards and forwards across that trench of seed raising mix, but you are trying to sow them quite a distance apart. And to look at them when you're lying on the ground like this, you'll think, gosh, they're so far apart, but when they germinate, they won't be. Now, because they don't like to be too deep, all as I do then is go through and rake. A little bit of raking to just lightly cover those seed. And then back with your number 9s to tramp it down. Got to have good contact with that soil and the seed. It obviously starts that germination process but keeps them nice and moist. Then to water them in, you need quite a fine rose, so always get your rose going first. Move it gently. Do a really good soak here, so that even though that seed raising mix is moist, it needs to be watered well to ensure that it's nice and wet and those seeds take up lots of moisture, which will start that seed raising process, or the seed germination process. Now, The unfortunate thing is that obviously carrots grow in the warm season, which is when we tend to get hot days and lack of moisture. If you can pick a day where you know you're going to get half a dozen days of rain or misty, moisty weather, then that's fine. If not, what I tend to do is cover the seed with some pre-soaked hessian, just some hessian bags. You can get these at hardware shops. Nice and moist. These are what they call sandbags, and I just lay them over the top. Again, clamp down. That will keep it a lot moister than if it's exposed to the sun. And just water that in again, and then water those every couple of days, or every day really, and then in about 4 to 5 days take them up. By that stage you should be starting to get germination if it's in mid-season. It can take a little bit longer at either ends of the season. If I don't put hessian bags down, I like to cover my seeds up, simply because you'll get birds pecking at them because they're so shallowly sown, or you can get local cats digging up. I've just make up these wire triangles out of a little bit of well mesh, light well mesh, and just pop them over like that. And that just keeps them protected. They are one of those vegetables that you don't need to put behind netting because birds don't tend to eat them. The only pest problem I have really is a little bit of whitefly if it gets too hot and humid, or late in the season you might get a bit of mice or rats eating the tops of them once they've developed. Once you've done that, you need to keep that moist, and obviously take your hessian bags off after 4 or 5 days and re-water everything, and keep your carrots moist for the rest of the time to harvest. So what I'd like to show you now is some that I put in a couple of weeks ago. So this is a patch that I did by the same method about 6 weeks ago, and you can see I've got my 2 rows. I also did an intercropping row of mixed lettuce leaves. Now that's something you can do if you wanted to. I've been picking those leaves for about 3 or 4 weeks now, and they're just about finished, and you can see that the carrots have come up and are overshadowing those now, but up until this last couple of weeks it's been fine to be able to grow a crop in between those rows. If we just have a look down here, you can see how in some areas I've got plenty of room in between carrots, and in others they're just too close together. So this is a great time to be thinning. So where they're just too thick, I just go through and pull out any that are too close. And even though they may look close, in a few weeks I'll go through and they should be big enough to use. So it's just a simple matter of doing that. Next thinning will be usable size carrots. So it really is a foolproof method to grow carrots. So have a go at it, and I hope you get lots of success.